This is In the Trenches, broadcast 40.
Welcome to In the Trenches, where entrepreneurs, artists, writers, designers, inventors, warriors, and leaders share their stories of doing the hard, creative work that impacts all of our lives. Let the journey inspire you to do something worthwhile, build something bold, and create your life's work. And now, your host, Tom Morkis.
Welcome back, everyone, to another broadcast of In the Trenches. Today's guest is Anfernee Chansamooth, the founder of ConfidentPreneur.com. And Anfernee is also a philanthropist, executive coach, business consultant, and writer. And he's actually trained literally over thousands of business leaders across 14 countries, from Laos to Sydney to Toronto, and has appeared on multiple different platforms, from Network 10 to TEDx, and is a writer for the Huffington Post. And most recently, though, Anfernee has actually become the National Partnerships and Content Manager at Hub Australia. And Hub is a co-working space in Australia that I've actually been to. So it's a really cool spot. And I'm excited to jump into the conversation today, specifically talking about this concept of co-working spaces and really the future of work. Anfernee and I were kind of talking about that offline. I'm really excited to start talking about that in more depth today. So Anfernee, thanks so much for being on the podcast today, man.
Oh, I'm excited to be here, Tom.
Great. So tell us a little bit more about yourself. I gave a brief bio, but tell us a little bit about yourself and what led you to what you're doing today.
I'll try and summarize this into like 2 minutes.
Sure. I know. I always get that from people. I probably should figure out something that's not such a broad scope topic, but go for it.
But let me take you to I'll take you back to 1997, which is kind of where this all started. I was working in the corporate world for Hewlett Packard at the time, and been in the corporate world for about 10 years after I graduated university. And I graduated with a business degree, business focusing on computing and information management, which really is just fancy language for being a coder. And I did a lot of programming, web programming at the time, and web design. And then I got this role. Interesting thing was the year I graduated from university was the year the .com busted. And so it took me a year just to get an entry-level role, working at a help desk for, or you guys will know, AOL. AOL no longer has a presence in Australia, but at the time it was, it's a good opportunity. And I worked in IT in help desk for about 6 months or about a year, and then I got this gig at HP, and ended up working in the call center, customer service, and was there for about a year before I moved into a management role, and I managed a team of about 10 people. And then in 2003, when I was there, globalization kind of hit, and the team that I was managing was then offshore to India. And as a result of that, I became the trainer who went over to India and trained the new team that was replacing my team in Sydney. So it was kind of a double-edged sword. Well, emotionally, it felt like I was, betraying the people that I had to let go, and then I had to go and now train these new people in India. But it gave me a lot of perspective around what was happening around with industry at the time, with what's happening with IT, and this new thing that was called outsourcing, or it wasn't outsourcing yet, it was more offshoring. And I saw these trends that were happening at the time in the business world. I'm going to go back to 1990s. No, it wasn't 1997. It was 2007 when I was working as a project manager now, still at HP. And I ended up one day in front of my screen as I, which is normal, typing away. And I had this massive headache. The best way I could describe this is I felt like I was getting smashed in the head with a baseball bat. And, my vision started to blur up. I was seeing triple of everything that was on the screen, and I just had no clue what was going on. And I asked my colleague next to me, I said, hey, what does it feel like to have a migraine? Because I've never had one before. and she said, if that's what you're feeling, you need to get to a doctor as soon as possible. And so I guess I don't even remember how it happened. I ended up at the doctor's office like an hour later. Probably shouldn't have been driving if I was. And then went through some testing, had some scans done, X-rays done, and whatnot, and was then told I had this growth, the size of a small, maybe not as large as a tennis ball, but it was large enough that it was noticeable in the right side of my temporal lobe, the right side of my brain, and had to go into emergency to basically cut it out because they didn't know what it was, and they were worried that it might have been, cancerous. It could have been anything. And fast forward to like December 10th that year, and this is 2006 now, and I was in hospital for a 5-hour surgery, and then spent the next 60 days in hospital, being basically treated with antibiotics for a bacterial infection which had invaded my brain. It's called cryptococcus for anyone that really cares. And really was forced to evaluate my life at that time. I was doing about 60 hours a week, working for this corporation, single for about 4 years, and I wasn't in any kind of relationship. Family stuff that was going on with my parents was just a mess. And I was earning good money, but had no life to speak of. Like, I couldn't spend it. I couldn't go anywhere. I was just tied to the job. So some people who are listening to this might be able to relate to that. And so I'm in hospital. I'm in depression. I didn't know it was called depression at the time, but that's what I was feeling. And just asked myself, what the F am I going to do with my life? And it was during that moment where I decided, like, first of all, I got to get the hell out of hospital and walking again. And then from there, I'm going to commit to doing something meaningful, because that was a very close call. I could have not walked out of there. I could have, walked out blind. This is what some of the risks of the surgery was. I could be blind. I could lose my eyesight. I could work out with I could lose half of my mobility. And so I felt, and I still do every day, that I was quite fortunate to have walked out with full mobility, full capacity to think and see and feel. And it's all there, and I'm okay. And health really, that taught me health is number one in prioritizing your life. If you don't take care of your health, everything else falls to shit. Mind the language. And that's when I, looked at, well, what is it that I really care about? And I went on this exploration. I moved to Canada that year, or the end of that year, so 2007. I booked a flight to Canada and one way, and then I basically organized a transfer through HP from Sydney to Toronto, and then worked, in a new role as a global project manager based out of Toronto, and spent the next 3 years in Toronto. Now, this is where there was another twist of fate, and about 18 months into my time in Toronto, I lost my job because the GFC had hit, and they were cutting a lot of project managers and people in the team, and not just across my team, it was across the board. And so I was forced. Now I was in a situation where I was in Canada. I had another year left on the visa, but the visa was limited to that company, so I couldn't legally work for anyone else. And I wasn't ready to leave Canada yet. I'd been there for 18 months, and I was actually quite enjoying my lifestyle. And I had built this network of new friends, and was dating some people and whatnot. And I just felt like, I want to stick around. And how do I do this, considering I can't work for anybody else? And this is where I guess this was my first foray into the world of entrepreneurship, and this idea of being like a self-employed person. And that kind of happened by coincidence too, because at the time I was, one thing that I was doing before I left Sydney was I started taking salsa dancing lessons, salsa classes. And I continued that when I was in Toronto and was very active. I started to volunteer for one of the dance schools and was teaching, beginner and intermediate salsa. And so my roommate at the time, she says to me, "Hey, Anf, you like, you do this salsa thing quite often, and you're teaching now. Why don't you teach out of our living room?" And we just had this space where we could, once if we moved the couches out, it was actually a really good dance floor. And so and someone else recommended, check out this thing called Meetup.com. And so I went on Meetup, and I created a beginner salsa group, and literally within like the space of a week, I had 200 members or followers on this Meetup group. And then I started promoting, next Sunday, come down to my place. I didn't tell them it was my place. I just said, come down to this venue. And they came down, and
That's pretty awesome.
And it was. And this is actually, talking. We were. For those of you who are listening to this, Tom and I met through this whole pay what you want idea that Tom's been working on. That was the original first time I tried pay what you want, because that was, I had my hat out and I said, guys, whatever you want, throw some cash into the hat. I'm happy to teach, and as long as you're getting value and having fun, like that's cool, And I think I had the first class was like 5 people. I made like $100 out of that, and for someone who's making like no job, and trying to wonder how the heck am I going to pay my rent, that was really awesome, And so I was doing that every week for like a few months, and then that turned into actually someone, again, call it coincidence, call whatever you want. Someone I mentioned to someone at a co-working space, actually in Toronto, at the Centre of Social Innovation. I volunteered there one time, and in the volunteer introductions, they asked, "Oh, so what do you do for fun?" And I said, "I actually teach salsa on the weekends out of my living room." And they said, "Well, would you be keen in coming down to our space and teaching our members some salsa, one afternoon?" And that turned into a full, like an actual 6-week gig, and then that turned into a 12-week gig, and I'm making like a couple $100 now teaching salsa out of someone's space, a co-working space, and that was kind of like the first venture into entrepreneurism and this idea of you kind of bend the rules, and just think outside. I don't like the phrase because I think outside the box, but that's kind of what it was. Yeah. So that's kind of that. And then from there, it led to, I was also volunteering now because I had so much time on my hands. I was volunteering for a couple of non-profits, one as a volunteer photographer, and another as I started to get into the world of social media, and following Twitter was kind of huge at the time, more so than Facebook. And I started to learn how to build a following. So I built, over the course of 6 months, I built like 2,000 followers on my Twitter handle at the time, which is, I'm not using it anymore, but that was my test. And then took that into this organization, which was a non-profit, and helped them with their marketing campaigns and learning how to pull people or attract people to live events, because that's what they were doing. They were putting together a national conference, and they needed help with that. So then I learned about PR. I learned about working with media partners. I learned more about strategic partnerships, and how to communicate value, how to communicate, what the mission of the business was and whatnot. And we put together, like, we had 4 months to put together a 200-person conference in Toronto, attract some really big name speakers. One came from New York. He came from the Bay Area. And that was a really cool event, and it showed to me what you could do with social media, what you could do with an online presence, and with some really strong values and a great team. I think I learned that was a huge lesson. Like, when you have a team of people who are aligned with a common vision, you can really make some amazing things happen. And then from that gig, I got a part-time or contracted gig as a social media consultant, and that was the next business that I went into, working for myself. At this point, I had given up the salsa because I didn't want to. Salsa to me was like a not an escape, but it was my way to find presence. And call it, I think it was like my meditation, because whenever I danced, and I still, it's the same when I dance now, it's a way for me to connect to myself, to my body, and to the partner that I'm with, and it's fully presence. and it's more like it might sound strange, but it is more like a spiritual experience for me. And so I didn't want that to be the business because it was taking that away from me, you know. But then social media consulting was more, I was enjoying that. That was really cool, and that's kind of was the client I was working with until I moved back to. And then in that 2009, my mother passed away, and that was a trigger for me to move to Laos, which is where I was born, and go and research the family history and to meet the family members that I'd never met. You know, our family left that country, left Laos in 1979, the year I was born, and I'd never been back. So that was 30 years later that I went back to really investigate my roots and get reconnected to the culture and the traditions of being, you know, a Lao person and seeing what's going on over there. So, you know, I volunteered whilst I was there for a school. They were a primary and a high school combined, and I took all these skills that I learned. So I took all these things like social media, partnerships, project management, all these different things I'd done in my life, took it over there and had this all, you know, as an offer to the school and said, anything you guys need, let's make it happen. And they loved the fact that I had these multi skills. So, and this is something I tell people today who come to me and they ask, oh, what if I have multiple talents or multiple passions? What do I do that, you know, because I'm struggling trying to find this one passion. My realization was like, when you're multi-talented and you have skill sets in different areas, that's actually a strength. And it's great to embrace that and not try and force yourself and pigeon yourself into one thing. For some people that works. Some people are just experts or, you know, at one thing and they can do that. You know, that's just their personality type and it's great. But I've seen a lot of people, entrepreneurs, struggle with trying to work out, oh, you know, but I can dance at the same time I can do marketing and I can do other things, and I'm conflicted because I don't know which one is my one passion. And I call BS on that. I think, no, if you're multi-talented, find a way to make it all work together. And I see that with you, like with you, Tom, because I can see that you've got these multiple skill sets, and you apply them quite well, and you found a way to marry some of them. So when you're doing things, I'm very observant at, you know, like your training from the military and how you bring that into business, and then how you bring that into, you know, discipline and all these things that come into it. They're transferable skills. You know, they're not. Yeah. It's not like I'm going to leave it in the military and I'm going to go and do something else. Like, you actually bring it with you, and that's to me the mark of success, or building that success is really embracing that. So so now I'm in Laos for a year. I launched a program called Design for Change Lao, which worked with children. It's an empowerment program, which isn't mine. I watched this TED Talk. This woman in India had created this program in India, took it to like 100 schools, or maybe 1,000 schools. And it was basically a 4-step, really simplified process for helping kids voice their concerns and whatever else, and getting them involved in their communities, and then bringing relevance back to education. And it used a design thinking methodology. And I loved that, and I showed that to the director of my school because she was looking for new ideas. And I said, hey, do you want to give this a go? And she was on board, and so we did that with my class of 30 English students I was teaching English to. And then from there, in the space of 9 months, it went from one class of 30 students to 9 schools, 200 kids, and about 20 different teachers, and was just amazing. The impact that had. Purely driven on volunteer force. Like, this was what I was doing when I wasn't working. I was having meetings with people. My weekends were spent meetings, putting together programs, documenting everything, working with people to do translations from English to Lao language. It was craziness, man. And that was like 8 months in Lao. But the results were remarkable, and I was quite inspired by that. And this is also, I think, what I learned was when you're inspired by something and really moved by it, it's true. It's like that saying, when you, when you do what you love, you never work a day in your life. And that's kind of what my experience was. I really enjoyed that experience. I learned how to lead a team. I already knew how to lead a team, but this was a different type of team. And they were all high performing, highly passionate, highly inspired. And I didn't feel like I had to push them much because they were already on it, And so by the time I had left, they had taken it to the 9 schools and done this. And I had already partnered with a video maker in Vientiane, where we were living. And he basically created an 8-minute documentary short film from the experience, which was, our plan was then to take that and take it to the government and see if we can get this program into public schools. Unfortunately, that didn't quite get to that step because the person who was the champion, who had taken it over after I left, because I passed it on to him and his organization, he got abducted it was more of a political abduction. And so that kind of stopped the project, and not just that project, but all projects that were happening through his organization. So that was kind of climate that I was working in terms of change work. And so I came back to Australia. That's now we're back in Sydney, and after 4 years abroad, and restarting, rebooting, and going, okay, now what? And I had these social media skills, and I wanted to do something in that space because it's the growing industry. It's where things are happening. And I met a guy who was brilliant at Facebook marketing, and I said, okay, why don't we do something together? And we did. We ran a Facebook marketing company for 2 years, and focused on. Well, I focused more on strategy, and he focused more on implementation of Facebook advertising and that kind of stuff. And we ended up doing a lot of talks and building a brand around that. And we did quite well. Like we were actually we had market recognition, and even the larger players in the market kind of knew who we were. And at the beginning of this year, 2014, we decided to split. Simply because we were moving in different directions. I'm more of a social entrepreneur, and more focused on change work and helping people shift through their problems and deeper level challenges and struggles that they have. And for me, it's all about leaving a lasting legacy and an impact, and helping people move through their challenges. Whereas the other person, he was interested, he had different interests, and so we just naturally went in different directions. So that led, so that now we're in 2014, and that's when I launched Confidentpreneur. It had a different name, prior to that, but it just came to me, and I thought, okay, this is what it is. I basically coach people on developing self-confidence and leadership, and typically they're entrepreneurs, and so I just put the name together and said, okay, let's call it Confidentpreneur. And that's an interesting story in itself, because what I've realized, as you know, Tom, we go through these things called pivots in the entrepreneur world, and I realized that. Something that kept on coming up for me was this concept of story and storytelling, and embracing your own story, and more importantly, the struggles you've had in your life, and the challenges that you've had, and the adversity you've overcome, and when you can embrace that as opposed to running away from it, which is what I was doing for many years, because I kind of. Yeah, the fact that I even told you the story of me going into hospital and having brain surgery, a year ago, I wouldn't tell you that story, because I felt like, it looked to me like it was a weakness in my life, and I didn't want to share that, and it also got to a point where I got sick of sharing it, because I spent everyone that came and saw me in hospital, like literally for 30 days, I was telling that story to, and I'm like, yeah, I don't want to tell that anymore. It's just, it makes people depressed. I don't want to depress people. I want to make people happy. And then I came to the realization that actually it's quite a powerful story, and it's a part of me, and it's the driver for what I'm doing now, which is helping people in the corporate space who are feeling like they're stuck, who are feeling like their careers aren't going anywhere, and they have a part of themselves that, whether it's creative, whether it's entrepreneurial, whether it's whatever it is, they're feeling like they're not utilizing that. And I've had it described to me as, my soul is being sucked away every day I'm at work, and I want to help those people because I've been through it, and my situation is the exact reason why I am the ideal person to work with these people, because I've been through it and they're looking for someone who's been through it, who can help them and guide them through it. And so, now I'm working with managers, sort of exec level managers who are going through that. Particularly right now, I've got one client who's at a manager level in a major corporation, top 5 auditing firm, global auditing firm, and he wants to become a senior manager in the next 12 months. So I'm working with him on how to do that and develop, social skills and whatever else, and that confidence that he needs to go there. I will sort of note here that the only reason I'm doing that for the longest time I resisted the corporate space. I left the entrepreneur world. I left the corporate world and just never looked back. And this year, I kind of had another realization as I was traveling through the US, because I went to Portland for World Domination Summit back in July. And I had this realization that a lot of entrepreneurs, and I remember reading one of your blog posts about this, about the entrepreneur journey, Tom, and a lot of startup entrepreneurs or wantrepreneurs, they get into this trap, this ego trap. And I know, because I was there for a good, 4 years, right? Is you get stuck on the identity, and you get caught on this whole thing like, I'm an entrepreneur, and at first it's liberating, because you sort of tell yourself, oh, you got freedom because now I can choose when I work. I can choose my clients. I can choose to travel when I want. I can go and attend any event that I want. Like, you have this freedom of time, which you don't necessarily have when you're working for someone else. And so it's easy to buy into that and go, look, I've got freedom, especially if freedom is your number one value, which it is for me. And for a lot, I think it is for a lot of entrepreneurs. But then that also it can become a trap, because what I've noticed was, because I attended literally hundreds of events, like, whether I was speaking at them or I was just there as a participant, and I'm constantly meeting entrepreneurs, and I'm reading blogs and all these things, and on the face level, you meet people who seem like they've got it all together, and it's part of the identity that's being promoted, and it's become this thing, but then when you really look into it, a whole stack of these people are struggling. They're not generating the cash flow they need to be sustainable. So they're sleeping on couches. They're whatever it is. And I was one of those guys. I was living with my family, sleeping on the couch for like a good 2 years when I was running my business. The last business. That's what I was doing. And you kind of like wear that as a badge of honor. It's like, I'm this struggling entrepreneur, and so is everyone else. So this is cool. And I got to a point. I'm 35 now, and I just got to a point where I realized, for me, traveling across the States and Toronto and Canada, I realized, looking at my core values and what I want in my life, that's not it. The badge of ego is not what I want. I want to be making meaningful change. I want to make a difference, and I also want to build a family and meet someone. And I also want to, I want a house, and I wanted these things. And it's not about buying into the American or the Australian dream, because I think that's bogus too. But it's really going back to, at your core, what do you really care about? And does that what you're doing, whether it's working for someone else or working for yourself, is it actually helping you get closer to that goal, or is it pushing you further away from that? And what I realized, that holding on to this identity and my belief that it was freedom was actually detrimental to the direction I wanted to go in. And so, I realized, and it actually happened because of that meeting, that when we were together, when you were last in Sydney, and we met Joe Bukowski, and his story around the struggles he went through as an entrepreneur, and finding what he needed to do, and not just his story, but some other stories that kind of highlighted to me. There's different ways of doing entrepreneurship. There's not just this one path that everyone seems to follow. And cash flow, this is what I like about what you're doing, because you have a very strong message around making sure there's cash flow in your business. And if you don't have that, if you're not selling, and if you've got fears around selling stuff, you need to really evaluate if that's something that you should be doing. And I had a very powerful coaching session before I left Sydney for Portland with a good friend of mine, Dev Singh, and he basically said to me, Anf, Like, do you actually love coaching? Because that's what I was doing. Or do you love the business of coaching? Right. And I had this realization, like the pin dropped. It's like, oh, I love coaching. I could coach people. I coach them for free. I could do it at any time of the day. I can just meet a stranger on the train and I could coach them through a problem they're dealing with. And I would just do it because I love helping someone work through their shit. But the business of it, chasing clients, doing marketing campaigns, and all these different things, totally not what I enjoy. Don't enjoy that at all. And I was like, and that as a result of that, my cash flow it was struggling. Like I had a couple of clients, but it wasn't at the level I needed it to be sustainable. So then it was a huge wake up call for me. And I realized, what I need and what I want is I want a situation where I can coach clients and do that part of it, which I do love. But someone else is bringing in the clients to me. And, so how does that look like? And I was very open to different ways of that happening. And this is how this role at Hub Australia came about, because when I got back from North America, literally the week following that, I sent a message to someone I knew that was already working at Hub Sydney, and said, hey, I love the organization. I love what the values are there. I love this idea of co-working. And is there any opportunity there, any part-time gigs happening at this place? And he said, there's nothing part-time, but we're actually looking for a full-time, what they call a business catalyst. And he sent me the job profile and I looked at it and straight away I just said, dude, like that's me. And it's one of those serendipitous, things that happen. And I applied for this role and I had to send through a 3-minute video application and went through 2 rounds of interviews, and 2 weeks later, I'm starting my role at Hub Australia. And then here I am getting paid to do what I really enjoy, which is networking. Like I love meeting people, and just connecting and finding out what really excites people, what makes them tick, understanding what their challenges are, and I'm bringing in my coaching skill set, so I'm not hired to be a coach yet. But I do have opportunity. Like today, I'm meeting one of the members, within the space, and I'm going to help her work out some of her challenges around her career, because she's highlighted that. And I said, hey, actually, I could help you with that. And it's adding value to them, to that particular member. And, I've helped other members as well in that capacity. But it just amazes me because I really spent a good 4 years trying to work out how do I make money from connecting people. And I couldn't quite crack it until this role came up a month ago, and thought, oh my gosh, I'm getting paid to connect people. That's all I do all day. And, and it happened, right? I think that the message here, the learning is don't get attached to how it will appear, and how it looks. Because we can get very caught in our mind, like it's got to be this way or it's no other way. Like it's got to be entrepreneur or it's got to be employee or whatever. And the way I see it is, no, entrepreneur for me is it's a mindset, a belief system, it's a way of being, and you can totally be an entrepreneur within an organization, right? And there's some people frame that as an entrepreneur, whatever you want to call it. It's about the skill set and how you view problem solving. Because at the end of the day, an entrepreneur is someone who looks at a problem and solves it, right? That's what it comes down to. So that's a long-winded story, but this is my journey and this is where I'm at now.
Yeah. Well, I honestly, there's probably a dozen or so topics that I could touch on there. But specifically, I'd like to talk about this concept of the future of work and collaboration and co-working spaces. Maybe how all three of those tie together. Obviously, I have collaboration on the mind. I'm kickstarting or actually publicizing, which is a Kickstarter-esque platform. But I'm crowdfunding my latest book, which is not ironically called Collaborate. And so this topic is very much on my mind right now. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on the future of work and where co-working spaces fit in the middle or in the midst of that. And then maybe if you have any thoughts on collaboration.
Absolutely. Okay, so one thing that really was, I'd been a member of Hub Australia for a year before I, was formally employed by the organization. And one thing that drew me to that space was when I was running Kaboom, which is a social media company. We were looking for venues to do our trainings out of, and Hub was one that was on the radar, and people were saying, "Hey, have you checked out this space?" And so I went in there, and it was very obvious, like from the moment I walked in there, was there was a thriving like vibe to the space. The space itself is quite unique. I know you've been in there, Tom, so you've seen it. It has a very creative slant to it. It's got one particular space on level 2 is called the playground, and it's got this. It looks it's fake grass, and there's a swing in there, and it just you think what is this? And it feels like you're in the park, and what I didn't know until very recently was that whole space was co-created by the community, by the founding members of Hub Sydney. And this is the idea of collaboration. So when Hub Sydney was launched, before it was launched, they actually did it through a crowdfunding campaign. And they basically used the campaign to attract people who resonated with the values of Hub Australia, and then they crowdfunded the funds for the launch party, but they also took that as an opportunity to bring in, like if you were committing any funds to the campaign, you were actually buying a membership, right? So it was a very clever way for them to find their members, and the founding members. And then once they got that, what they did with the members was they actually said, okay, this is not like Hub space, this is your space. You are the founding members. We want you to help us co-create and co-design what this space looks like for you. And so they went through a process of multiple meetings and whatnot, and they really came out with a visual design for the place and the layout. So if you're ever in Sydney and you walk in there, you'll see what I'm talking about. You can check out the website too. It's just so fascinating to me that this is available now, and this is how things are created. It's basically bringing people with different concepts, different skill sets, different mindsets into a room and saying, "Hey, let's see what happens if if everyone throws up ideas, and instead of like assuming a place of one person leading that and like just enforcing a concept or an idea, what if we open it up to everyone contributing in some way, and appreciating and respecting difference and diversity, and then playing with that space and seeing what can be created, right? And that's really the essence of Hub Australia and Hub across the globe. There's actually the Hub brand is in multiple countries. There is a global network. And this comes back to the idea of this co-working. So what is co-working? It's there. Before we go into that, I want to say that there is this idea of shared office space that came about. Was already in place for the corporate market, and it's basically people in the corporate space, employees or whatnot, who wanted just time out from their offices, or maybe these are people who are working remotely, from home, or they're traveling to another city and they just need somewhere to work out of for a day. So you have this what's called a shared office space. And you can go in and pay a fee or annual fee or whatever, and you get a space. Very similar to a business lounge or a business lounge at an airport if you're part of any of those lounges. Very similar feel. Very like it's clean. It looks smick. You go in there, you get your coffee and whatever. The only downside, if you see it as a downside, is they're not very collaborative. They're more about just you going in there and you have a space to, a Wi-Fi outlet, and you've got a place to do your work for the day, or when you're in transition. Now, co-working takes that concept. So it's creating a space for a community, and then saying, well, it's not just about the space, right? It's not just about giving you a physical location to work out of. It's about, if you're an entrepreneur, or even if you're an entrepreneur, or if you work for an organization of some sort, and you're looking to innovate and you're looking to collaborate and get new ideas, to tap into creativity, to access the mental power and the skill sets of people who generally don't sit in your office or you generally don't work with, there is power in that, and there's great opportunity, right? We've seen that happen in cafes. Like certainly a lot of solo entrepreneurs and freelancers will go and sit in a cafe for a day, and they'll meet people, and then you're talking to someone, and all of a sudden you're doing a partnership, or they know someone that you need to connect with, and then that becomes a thing, or you go to a party somewhere, and and you socialize, or and then that becomes a thing, that becomes an opportunity, whether it's a client or a new investor or whatever that may be, or a new job opportunity. So co-working takes that concept. Someone wrote about this concept. They call it the third space. And third space is a place in between home and work where business is really done, right? So it used to be cafes, libraries, whatever, like networking events, whatever it may be. And now taking that concept and going, oh, what if we created a space specifically where we could facilitate those interactions and those serendipitous meetings, right? And this is what happens. And so because cost of renting, if you're just starting out, you're not going to rent an office in Sydney. Like, it's going to cost you an arm and a leg. Or if you go to New York City, or I don't know what it's like in the Bay Area, but for most people starting out, it's just beyond their budgets. They can't do that. So co-working gives you an affordable way to access space that you can work out of, and it gives you a community, which is something else a lot of startups and entrepreneurs need and are looking for, because it's like, let's be frank, it's boring to work out of home 7 days a week for a year. Like, you just go nuts, you lack social interaction. And I think that's something that's critical and vital for your business to really thrive, is to be able to connect to real people. We got virtual and online, and you can do that, but there's studies and research that's been done around like how important it is to have the human touch, to sit in front of someone and have real friends. And as much as social media allows us to connect, it also is helping us disconnect in a big way. And you can go and YouTube this stuff. But, so co-working actually allows people to connect and collaborate, because, particularly in Hub, we're very focused on running social events. So there is like a Thursday, what we call it a mixed bag lunch, where the whole community comes together. Everyone brings some kind of food or drink that can be shared, and it's really having like a huge 60-person picnic in our lunch space, and that's where business is done. People get sitting. This week I'm sitting next to someone new, I'm saying hello, I'm sharing my project, working at what you're doing, and all of a sudden it's like, hey, I know this person that you should connect with, or I'm doing this project that you might want to get involved in, and it becomes this ground, this place or a space. I like to use the word space. It's really a place for co-creation, and it happens like you're just in a lift with someone, and you just you do your just a little bit of intro, and it just works out. And we're doing a Christmas party. We did a Halloween party a few weeks ago. And again, these are just opportunities for people to connect, and that's the essence of co-working, and that's what happens.
Yeah. So a lot of stuff there. But tell me a little bit about, I guess, why do you think it matters? You've kind of alluded to it. You probably made some points about it too. I know you have, because in some of the comments that you made earlier. But why do you think collaboration matters? Why do you think this kind of interaction matters in the context of, I suppose, the work that we do?
Collaboration matters because we live in a connected society, right? So with the advent of I'm going to go back now to what the internet has done, right? So and internet and social media. So we're living in an age of transparency, right? So what social media does for any organization or any business or entrepreneur, it allows you to connect to your audience in a way that wasn't there 10, 20 years ago, right? Like, we used to operate in silos. You had these businesses that ran on its own. Back in the 80s, the whole, the view of business was you ran a company, and then you had competition. And so your eyes were really much more focused on the competition. And how do you stay on top of the game, and how do you get to the top of the game? Different psychological positioning. And then we move into, the explosion of social media. And what that did was, now it kind of leveled the playing field. You didn't have to be a multinational corporation to have reach. Right? You could be one person sitting at home, or at a cafe or whatever, with a blog, or a podcast or whatever it is, and you could now literally reach hundreds, thousands, if not millions of followers and audience anywhere in the world. And so if you had a real service, a real product that you could offer that was of value, you could turn that into a viable business. You could turn that into a viable solution that would help people, and as a result of that, it's also, and this is why a lot of traditional companies fear social, because for them it's like, oh no, we have to be transparent about our operations. If we're dumping oil, into an ocean somewhere, people are going to find out. You can't hide that stuff anymore. Like that's going to happen, and this kind of moves with. It also correlates to a shift in consciousness, and I don't, it's interesting. There's a lot of literature around this stuff and psychological study, but what's happening is we are moving into what's called, there's a guy, his name's Aaron Hurst, he wrote a book called The Purpose-Driven Economy. And where it used to be more about profit in the 80s and whatever, now it's become more of social justice and change. We've seen things like the Arab Spring, the revolution in Egypt. We're seeing things that's happening in China. We're seeing things, and this is another thing. We're now in a time where we can see what's going on in other parts of the world where we couldn't, 2 decades ago or a decade ago, and this drives the way we do business, because we're living in a time where a lot of people, looking at Gen Y and younger generations, they're growing up in a world which has a lot of problems. So we're talking about global warming. We're talking about the education systems are breaking. We're talking about financial systems are breaking. We had the economy crash in multiple, countries like Greece, in whatever, it's going on over there. US had obviously GFC. All these things are happening. And we have such visibility to all of this. We're seeing a lot of natural disasters. And what that does, it actually brings us back to humanity and really gets us to a place where we're starting to look at, well, what does it mean to be, a person growing up in wherever you are and part of a global community, right? It's no longer just local. Local is important. At the same time, we have a view to global, because we're looking at, well, what's happening here? And we can see what our neighbors are doing, right? The lines of political division, kind of like, in a way, the internet has dissolved those, because we can look beyond that. And there were a lot of movements. Some of you might remember the Occupy movement. There's been I think they started in Toronto or somewhere. There was the what was it called, like the slut movement or something like that, where it was all about slut shaming and whatever. It was a huge, like, feminine-driven movement. There's all these things that are going on. And to really bring it back to your question, Tom, why is collaboration important? Because this is, if you're not collaborating and if you're operating in silo and you think that you can just be, like your own, stand alone on an island somewhere, the reality is that you can't. If that's your mentality, and you don't collaborate, and you take on the old school, well, I say old school, I'm talking about the 80s view of, like, everyone is competition, you're not going to succeed. What we've seen now is that this is not new, this idea of partnerships. The biggest brands, the biggest partnership companies have strategic partnerships. They worked out how to collaborate, and I love the example of using Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, right? So Apple and IBM, right? Microsoft and Apple, right? To what is viewed as competition in the same space, but they collaborated on many projects. You can go and look at their interviews. Like, there was a couple of interviews where Jobs and Gates sat next to each other and said, yeah, we've been working on some stuff together, because they realized that their audience was the same audience. and they could actually work together to provide a solution that would help move the industry forward. And this is what co-working it does. So, as I mentioned to you before, we started this call, Tom. There are 12 co-working spaces in Sydney alone, and you can view that. We could sit there, as a company and say, "Oh my gosh, look at all the competition." But we don't see it that way at all. We actually view it as, well, everyone has a place in this space. There are more than enough people in Sydney to warrant having multiple co-working spaces, and each space has its own identity. Each space has its own niche. Each space has its own strengths and weaknesses. And if we work together, right, as a community, a co-working community, we can actually grow this concept and this idea of future of working. We can actually grow innovation in Australia. We can actually grow collaboration in Australia, and that's for the greater good, right? And this is back to your question of why collaboration. This is why, because beyond our individual businesses, there is a greater purpose. And if you're in a purpose-driven business, I would say that most people are. I don't know why you're in business if you don't have some kind of purpose. Then it's like looking at your competition or your neighbor and saying, well, hey, we've got the same purpose. Our objective is to do this, change this in some way. Why don't we, if we work together, we can reach that goal faster than if we were to fight and compete, right? Now let's work out a way where that can work, because you're great at this and we're great at this. So we can refer clients to each other. We can do, not all the time, but we can look at how we can win together. And if we're winning together, then also the clientele and the audience we're looking for, they're going to win as well. And that's what it comes down to.
That's awesome. Well, we're at a point now where I could probably keep going, but we're hitting about the 50-minute mark here. Mm-hmm. So I want to try to keep it under an hour. So I just want to, I guess, because there are other questions I would love to ask you, but I guess if there's something we could wrap it up with, focusing on somebody who's interested in getting into the space, into the context of maybe a collaborative project or something like that, trying to connect with other people, kind of what you're doing with the hub and kind of what happens at co-working spaces. What should they do? So maybe a bit of advice to that person who's interested, but maybe who's introverted. I'm kind of a bit of an introvert, so it was kind of hard for me to get over it, but I'd like to hear what your thoughts are on that and how somebody might go about doing that. Is that question clear enough? Yeah,
absolutely. So, it might surprise you, but I'm actually quite introverted myself. And the way to go about that is one thing that I would encourage, a couple of things. First thing is get very clear on who you are, what your strengths are, what your values are, because that's your starting point. If you are not clear on that, it makes it very challenging to work out who to collaborate with. Okay. But that might be your journey. You may be at a stage where you need to go and meet different people and ask different things. So that will help you get clarity, and that's okay too, right? But what I would suggest, if you're introverted, for example, is there's multiple ways to access people, right? Like there is online. You can go to, there are a stack of meetup groups. Go to meetup.com. And they're just like groups that are created for like-minded people, right? So that's how I started a salsa group. There's like anything from bushwalking to dating to whatever it is that you're into, IT, whatever. It's all there. There's, Facebook. I'm a huge fan of Facebook groups, so whatever industry, passion, interest that you've got, you can do a search for groups on Facebook that relate to that particular topic, and you can join those. And that's one way that you can connect to people as an introvert without having to actually meet them face to face, right? But I would encourage that you get active within the community, whether it's like a live community, like a hub, or a co-working space in your local town, and it's not an or, I would say and. So you do that, so you get and meet people, and then you also, so make an effort at least once a month. I try to, when I was like running my own business, I'd make an effort at least like once a month. I'd go and attend some kind of event somewhere, right, in the city, where I knew there'd be other people who were going through similar questions. And then I'm also very active on Facebook and also on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn is, for those who are new to it, it's the professional network. It's where you'll find HR, recruiters, you'll find CEOs, and you'll find, like, if you're really talking from a professional context and business context, I highly recommend you look at LinkedIn. Just as a social media platform. Then you've got Twitter. Twitter is another way to engage. I know I've engaged with Tom and other people through Twitter as well. And so you don't get into a state of overwhelm, just pick one. Start with one, and just get really good at that. Like I did. I got really great at Twitter, and then I moved on to Facebook. Right. And then once I got good at Facebook, then I moved on to LinkedIn. So, don't get into this there's 20 different social media. There's actually hundreds of social media platforms. Don't get caught up in that. Just pick one thing. Look for groups. There are groups on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on Facebook. Then there are blogs. There's another way to reach out to a community is find out whatever topic you're interested in. Google topic and then put blog at the end of it, and it'll give you a list of blogs, and just go to the top 5 blogs or whatever and start reading through whatever's being written, shared, and then start commenting, because that's another way to engage, right? If you've engaged with the blogger who's is an influencer of some sort, then they can recommend to you, hey, here's some ideas for you to connect. I also like to email people. I collect a lot of business cards, as you can imagine, as part of my role, but my objective is always to take it from a group setting to a one-on-one. So I like to, and this is my personal strategy, is I did a lot of interviews. I interviewed, actually, I still owe you that interview, Tom, but we did an interview when Tom was in Sydney. And that was my way to reach out to people as well. So I would find them on a blog somewhere, or someone would refer me to a person. And then I would contact them and say, hey, I'm doing this interview, just to get to know, different types of entrepreneurs and whatnot, or I'm interested in this topic. Let's have a chat. Or are you open to that? And, 9 out of 10 times people said yes. And I guess the final tip here is use your existing network. So you already have friends, and just let them know that you're interested in whatever topic you're interested in. Ask them, and this is a golden question that I think is neglected too many times, is who do you know, right? So who do you know that does this? Who do you know that knows about this topic? And put it out there. I love using my Facebook feed for that, and I just put a question, and you'll see me crowdsourcing ideas all the time. And I know Tom does that too. And you just go, I have this idea. Who do you know who can help me with this idea? And then you'll be surprised, how many people in your current network already know people, but you just never asked them, and they didn't know you were interested in that, so they couldn't tell you that they knew this. So, there's some practical tips for you.
That's great stuff. Well, Anfernee, I loved it, man. Great conversation. I could pick your brain for several more hours, but I just want to give the listeners an opportunity to find out where they can reach out to you and connect with you. So tell us, where's the best place for that?
Sure. The best place to reach me directly is through confidentpreneur.com. Let me spell that for you. So it's confident, CONFIDENT, preneur, this is one word, PRENEUR.com. So confidentpreneur, I'm sure Tom will link you to it anyway. And that's probably the best way to engage with me. I'm on Facebook, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Twitter, also Instagram, so quite active with social media. And then if you want to look at the company that I'm working with, the organization, go to Hub Australia, so hubaustralia.com. And that's a really great place to learn more about this co-working concept, because Hub is the leader in co-working in Australia. And we're putting together a national conference later, beginning next year, which is going to involve different co-working spaces from all over the place coming in together, and having this is again going back to the idea of collaboration. It's an opportunity for all these spaces to come together and go, how do we move this industry forward? How can we do better for our clients?
Awesome. Great stuff. Well, I really appreciate it, Anfernee, and I will make sure everything is linked up in the show notes. And so I just want to say thanks again for being on In the Trenches. It was a pleasure.
Love being in the trenches with you, Tom, man. I love your work, and definitely love. We'll have to chat again soon because I know you're doing some amazing stuff too.
Awesome.
And that wraps up another broadcast of In the Trenches. If you're interested in checking out the show notes, just head over to tommorkes.com/podcast to see our latest episodes. Also, I just wanted to give a quick update to fans and listeners of In the Trenches, and specifically what I'm working on right now. For the past 2 years, I've been publishing books, my own and others, through Insurgent Publishing, my boutique publishing company. In the past 6 months alone, I've helped 4 individual authors launch their books to bestseller on Amazon, including Dan Norris's The 7-Day Startup and David Nihill's Do You Talk Funny, among others. And both of those books are still top of the charts months after launch. I've learned 2 important things from all this. Number 1, that people still read books. And believe it or not, they're willing to pay for the good ones. And number 2, the $60 billion book industry is only getting bigger, and the barrier to entry is only getting lower, which means access to this market has never been closer to the average writer, blogger, or author. It is literally within the grasp of anyone who wants it. But you need to know how to approach it the right way, with patience, with a strategy, and with the right implementation and execution. That's why I've been able to launch so many bestsellers, many that are still top of the charts, because we brought great books to the people who wanted and would pay for them. No slimy sales tactics, just honest, powerful marketing. Now, I want to show other authors and publishers how to do the same. 4 months ago, I launched the pre-beta to a new super secret platform called Publishers Empire. In that time, I've helped a dozen authors and publishers start to bring their ideas to life. And with their help and feedback, we've quickly developed what is, in my opinion, the best, most comprehensive publishing training platform in the world. And now I'm getting ready to open the doors up to a few more students. So if you're interested in being part of a tight-knit family of publishers who help and support one another through their writing and publishing projects, if you want access to over 100 HT training videos to take you through the writing and publishing process, if you want access to proven copy and paste book marketing and sales copy, stuff that we've used to launch bestsellers, and if you'd like professional book covers and templates you could plug your own work into and look like a pro in minutes, and if you'd like all of that while getting the chance to be mentored by me, check out publishersempire.com and sign up to be notified when we launch. That's www.publishersempire.com. I hope to see you there. As always, this is Tom Morkes. If you're listening to this, you are the resistance.
Thank you for listening to In the Trenches. Your creative work doesn't stop here. Join the resistance, the small but growing army of entrepreneurs and artists putting a dent in the world at www.tommorkes.com. Never fight alone. Join the resistance.